All right, let's get into our first topic then. And should all children who kill be named? So a teenager who murdered his ex-girlfriend has been identified by a judge. 15-year-old Holly Newton was stabbed to death in Hexham in Northumberland in January of last year. Her killer has been named as ex-boyfriend Logan McPhail, who was 16 at the time. Now, the judge decided that he should now be named as it's in the interest of national debate around knife crime and the violence against women and girls. So is it time to unmask all underage killers? I'm going to start with you, Paula, as a lawyer. How do you feel about this?
Well, first of all, of course, heartfelt, I'm so sorry, so deeply sorry, and my heartfelt sympathies to Holly's parents and to all parents who have lost children due to the hand of another child. I mean, sadly, Storm, it happens. But to answer your question, do I think that all child killers should be named? Then the answer is no, and it has to be known. Let me explain why. It has to be known because each case needs to be considered on its own particular facts. And when the court does decide whether to lift the reporting restrictions and to identify a child, the court has to take into account a number of situations. And those situations, I think, are going to upset some of your viewers because it is focused actually on the child and not necessarily on the crime. So it's about the welfare of the child. It's about the child's opportunity to be rehabilitated into society. It's about the protection of that child and what would happen to that child if his or her name was released to the public. So it's those things that a judge has to think about. Now, there is also the competing need of the public and whether it's in the public interest for that child to be named. And in this case, in Holly's case, it was. And you'll remember the case of Brianna Guy, of course. And in that case, again, though the killers were named, the children were named, again, because it was considered to be in the public interest for them to be named. There is a case that I can tell you about where actually the court said it's not going to be in the interests for the public to know the name of this child. And this was in relation to our youngest terrorist. And the reporting restriction was upheld for our youngest terrorist because that child was diagnosed with autism and there was a fear that the child, if their name was released to the public, could actually be approached and further groomed and further caught up in this terrible world of terrorism and poor behaviour. And so in that case, the judge said, I'm not going to name the child.
But am I not right in saying that when they turn 18, their name will be released anyway?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
So what's the point? If a child is 17, 17 and a half, you've got, what, 6 months where they can remain anonymous? So
you're absolutely right. So in a youth offending court, automatic reporting restrictions. So you cannot know. So any child who appears in front of a youth offending court, they will not be named. Once the child moves into the arena of an adult magistrates court or a Crown Court, because the crime is so serious, that is where the court can then decide whether to name the child or not. And you're right, when the child turns 18, an adult, the reporting restrictions are lifted. However, it is possible for a barrister to come along and make an application to the High Court to continue that reporting restriction. That did happen with John Venables, you'll remember, and but that was then eventually lifted. So it is still possible to continue that reporting restriction well into the child becoming an adult, into their 20s, 30s, whatever.
What do you think about, Susan, when we say we need to unmask all child killers? The all might be where the problem lies.
I think the all is where the problem lies completely, and I don't think there's anybody who could reasonably argue just blanket without knowing each and every case and considering the facts. All is the answer. But I do think you can make quite a lot of arguments for why in a lot of cases, and a lot of the cases that have happened, that it is a positive thing to do. And the reason is, I mean, I take your kind of legal arguments on board, obviously, but as a journalist, the main direction I have to kind of whether you should name people who are so underage, and you brought up John Venables, who of course, along with Robert Thompson, were the killers of James Bulger back in the 90s, and I covered that case as a journalist. I was working in Manchester at the time, and obviously that happened in Liverpool. And one of the reasons that I think it's very interesting to look at that particular case because they were both named. And John Venables in particular has reoffended and been kind of widely kind of speculated about in the public arena. Robert Thompson has disappeared and now they are both released. My understanding is, although John Venables has been, I think, been put back in prison for various other crimes. And Robert Thompson, I hope, is living a good and positive life under another name. And of course, that will be what happens. Children, obviously, who commit these crimes have the opportunity to create another name and another identity. Their appearances will change as well. So actually, the naming of them as children, and if they are released later, the impact isn't so severe. Everyone where they're going, if they're going into prison, will know what they've done. So the people that they are around will know actually their crimes, because that's how the kind of those things do tend to work. But I do think in society now we have the extra problem of speculation on social media. And the problem with not naming, I don't think anybody should be named who was accused of a crime until found guilty. I mean, that's a whole other debate about when that happens to people accused of all sorts of things. I think it's very unhelpful to name people until they're convicted. But on conviction, then the case we had in Southport recently of people speculating names and just throwing names out, just to whip people up when they didn't know who it was, it's not helpful. Now, that needs to be punished very severely. That needs to be dealt with. But if you can name on conviction, then I think it can answer a lot of the questions people have, and people won't be speculating about people who haven't committed that crime. And the other thing I would say as a journalist, journalists can get a bad rap for things, but the whole point of journalism, when it's done well, is to explore and explain why things happen, to go into the stories a bit more and try and understand so we can learn things. And I do think that for a lot of people, seeing the faces of John Venables and Robert Thompson, who were children who looked as innocent and as adorable as everybody's children at home, and to see that they had committed something like that was impactful and meaningful, and teachers and society and parents need to have that reflected back at them to see these are ordinary people who do terrible, terrible things. Everyone thinks that murders will look like the famous shots of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, and that's not the case, and especially not in these cases, and we need to look into that. So I do think for all those reasons, I can support a lot of the naming that can go on.
OK, I just want to go to the phone lines, but I'll definitely come back to you guys in a minute. Christine from Surrey, how do you feel when it comes to naming children that have been convicted, that are guilty of murder?
9 out of 10 children shouldn't be named. Shouldn't be? They are growing up to be proper little thugs. They shouldn't be named. You're just putting them on the stage and giving them a big audience.
OK. Well, that's one reason not to name them, just in case it gets them a bit of a reputation and, maybe they get a little bit more kudos. Is another reason not to name them perhaps that they may be victims themselves? I'm just thinking if someone, and obviously not in all cases, but if a child is committing such hideous crimes at the ages of 11, 12, 13, are they not a product then of their upbringing, of the society around them? There's a potential there for they've been brought up in abusive environments, and we want to be able to rehabilitate these children rather than label them very early on.
You're actually blaming the parents.
I'm not blaming the parents necessarily, society in general. It could be extended family members. We are talking very generally and not in any sort of specific case, and I'm going to reiterate, obviously not in all cases, but there is a chance that a child who has committed such a hideous crime as murder is in fact a victim themselves.
9 out of 10 of them, no. 9 out of 10 of them have got into gangs, and they're proper little thugs. They don't need a stage, the worldwide stage, to say, look at me, look what I've done.
OK, well,
it's going to grow up to be worse. Why blame the parents? 9 out of 10 parents are not to blame.
OK, well, Christine, the 1 out of 10 then, why would you not name them?
1 out of 10?
Sorry, why would you name the 1 out of 10?
1 out of 10 Why would I not name the 1 out of 10?
Why would you name them? Because you said you wouldn't name 9 out of 10 of them because you wouldn't want to give them the kudos of being named. Yeah. Why would you name the 1?
The 1 out of 10, the judges will know, that the lawyers will know that 1 out of 10. They stand out. They're victims themselves.
OK, so you do acknowledge that there is a chance that a child could be a victim and that has led to them committing some sort of hideous crime?
Yes.
OK. Christine, thank you very much for your call. Sue from Wiltshire, how do you feel about naming children who've committed murder?
I'm going to be very upsetting a lot of people, but I will. I would name all of them. Even my own children, I would.
Isn't there a chance that if you name them, you're going to really stymie the chances of rehabilitation and really getting to the core of why they committed such hideous crimes?
I think that should have been happening beforehand. I've been a victim of abuse and been grown up in the care system. There is no need. There's no need. A murder is murder. I'm sorry. If my kids committed murder, I would phone the police.
I mean, what do you say to that?
I think the Robert Thompson case kind of proves that, Sue's point and your point about rehabilitation. It is possible. It is all about the choices you make. Robert Thompson
but not
and John. It's not guaranteed. But they committed the same crime. They were the same age and they were treated the same way and have two very different outcomes because of the choices they made. The crime. You're talking about rehabilitation, but they've still committed that crime. They still have to get past that, and the people close to them will know that about them as well. So that is still going to be, a huge thing they have to get past. But I don't see the naming of them is going to make that much difference.
And that is the difficulty, isn't it? We've got lots of different pools here. We've got the pools of the journalist who wants to be able to tell the whole story, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We have then got, of course, somebody who we mustn't forget about, the victim and the victim's family in all of this and how they feel that the murderer should be treated. And then, of course, we have to question ourselves as a society, well, what does rehabilitation mean? Does rehabilitation mean that we want this child to be able to be reintegrated into society fully? Or do we want this child to carry around the baggage of what could have been an incident, a one-off incident that they were led into?
You can't take the crime away just by not naming them. That baggage is still there, and they will change their name and they will change their appearance. So I actually don't see that. I hope what they've done will always follow them.
And I do wonder whether actually using the instances to open up debate about other subjects, like the judge has in Holly Newton's case. She wants to open up the conversation about knife crime and crimes against women and girls. It gives us a clearer view as to why this child was murdered, because otherwise we could just think it was a case of gang-related issues.
Well, her mother actually wanted to talk about domestic issues. It's not a knife crime; it's a domestic violence. Because it's
a very different crime.
Because it was an ex-boyfriend who turned up and stalked her, and that is a huge issue. And I completely sympathise with the point of view of the family there, because I think that is it's amazing to me that nowadays we have it's on the increase that we have this abuse of girls and girls putting up with abusive relationships and staying in them and not being able to get out of them and terrible fatal consequences like this.
But focusing on the question, does the picture of this person make me suddenly pay more attention to the story? And that's why why I draw the question about society as a whole. That's what to me we need to think about. Why should the picture of John Venables or Robert Thompson make a difference to the impact of what they did?
Well, because in this instance, we now know that it was an ex-boyfriend, which changes the whole dynamic of the story, doesn't it?
But you told me that. I don't need to see a picture, Storm.
Well, you could not see a picture and not name him, but if you lived in that area, if you were anywhere around that family, you would know who her ex-boyfriend was, surely. There would be rumours spilling
Or she might have had another ex-boyfriend who could have been
identified.
Tarred with the accusation, and it wasn't true. That would be horrific.
And that is sometimes an argument that is used for a reason for why you would identify, because there are, gossip swirling around on social media, etc., and it becomes a nightmare for all of those in the surrounding community who actually want the person to be identified, because it then takes them out of the firing line, which does often happen. So I totally appreciate that. But, we come back to, as I say, in terms of what society wants to do to rehabilitate a child, that rehabilitation needs to be purposeful, it needs to be effective. And for us to do that, I think realistically, the experts working with that child need to know that they have an unfettered opportunity to do so. If they are working with that child and at the same time they've got to worry about the child's safety, for example, or they've got to worry about others who might want to continue to influence the child, that is going to impact on the rehabilitation process.
But we also need to look at prevention, and as a society, we need to understand certain cases to be able to get ahead of the curve and see what's gone wrong, like you're saying, what has led to certain situations, and see if we can kind of understand and implement things that stop things happening in the future.
Kamari from London, what's your thoughts on this topic?
I think they should not name the child.
Ever?
Not ever when he's adult, but later on. But at the moment, when he's a child, he should not be named, regardless of the crime.
Oh, well, what about this case where the killer has been named, the murder of a 15-year-old girl? Do you think it was appropriate for the judge to name it on the basis of opening up conversations about domestic violence and violence against women and girls?
No, regardless what it comes under, it's not. He could have killed a boy. So regardless, it's a murder. It's a murder, but still, he's a child. So he's a child. He has a child's mind, and we should treat him as a child. We should not name the child because it's a murder or it's a domestic violence or it's whatever crime.
Okay.
So we should not.
There's
no benefit to the society knowing his name. There's no benefit to anybody. So he should not be named. Okay,
but then you get into the trouble of, we say at 18, you're no longer a child and you're now an adult. So on your 18th birthday, your brain obviously all of a sudden changes from a child's brain to an adult brain. Surely we can consider the fact that there will be people under the age of 18 who very much know right from wrong and know what they're doing. And there will be people over the age of 18 who are still very immature and don't know. I'm not sure whether the child's brain is a reason to not name somebody under the age of 18.
Hello, I lost you there.
Well, if a child is 17 and a half, you still wouldn't name them. But if a child is 18 on the dot, you would name them. That's just such a finite number, a very why all of a sudden overnight does your brain develop to a capacity to be able to take on?
No, yeah, I don't agree with naming them even at the age of 18. I don't think it's necessary at all. Overnight, it doesn't develop. And it's not going to do any benefit to the society. So there's no positive impact on society by naming the child. Why do we need to know the name? Okay. And it's not going to give any positive benefit to any society. And especially when there's a child killers, I have noticed if their list is banded and if they are allowed to name, their name is all over the papers in block, highlighted way, and on the screen on the national news. But there are so many murders happening in the country by adults, but their names never been published such a way, given such a publication. I haven't noticed that. So only for child killers, there's a huge publicity, and it's all over the papers everywhere.
I think it's because it's often incredibly.
For that?
I think it's often because it's incredibly shocking when you hear that a child has killed another child, but maybe the media has something to take responsibility.
I think your point about a picture was interesting as well. I think a lot of people would like to look the other way, and actually it's easier not to when there's a picture and when there's a name and you've made the person real, and we understand that this is a person just like everybody else, and that's where I'm coming from. And as a journalist, that's what I would want to do.
I just wanted to mention Eliane, who was a 15-year-old girl who was stabbed outside her school in Croydon, and her killer was a 17-year-old boy. He wasn't named, but the impact of her death, I think, still carries with us. And that was another example of a domestic abusive situation.
All right, something completely different.